What I hear in your eloquent words over and over again here is you're basically a space between stimulus and response that's just lovingly there in eternal presence, experiencing phenomenon, very curious, very open, and not afraid, not fear based, yet very radically present. So you're not detached or bypassing, and then you can just respond through presence rather than the limbic brain or out of old conditioned patterns, right? And underneath it all, I have a very similar approach, and your words are beautiful. I feel like the universe is infinitely loving. I'm connected to it. Nothing is disconnected to it. So whatever shows up, and believe me, a lot does that I don't like from the preference standpoint or the ego mind. But whatever shows up underneath it with presence, I feel like, all right, this is a gift. I just need to unpack it and then see it from that perspective. What are the blessings? What is it trying to tell me and teach me? Are you coming from a similar place that it's a loving, benevolent presence, whatever it is, even though it's a mystery?
Uh, yes, Paul, with this qualification that if I think too much about what it is and that the universe is loving and that what's happening ultimately in the grand scheme of things is good, if I start thinking too much about it, then I'm actually getting caught up again in this uh, um, having my experience of beingness and my experience of what's going on in the world be mediated by my mind. And one of the surprising things that I realized in various ways, formal study into how the mind works and just my life experience was that, surprise, surprise, the thing that gets in our way most in our life is what we think we know with our conceptual mind. And so I began to realize that I need to be very much the observer of what's going on in my thinking when thoughts pop up, and even when if I'm deliberately thinking to sort something out, or just the automaticness of thoughts coming and going. Just as you pointed out, it is very much my perspective and my experience now, Paul, to realize that I'm not my thoughts. I used to kind of just live, and most people do, just live their thoughts. We think that's who we are. But no, we're the awareness that's in the background of the activity, mental activity, emotional activity, even in the background of our bodily manifestation. We're the aware presence that's in the background. And when we repeatedly come back to noticing that I'm actually the one that's noticing the thoughts that are popping up, and I'm the one who can choose as to whether they need to be engaged with and responded to, or whether they're just thoughts, and I can just notice that they're thoughts with no significance. They're not true. I can't ever show that a conceptual idea is true ultimately. And I begin to notice that they're not me either. Then life takes on a very different flavor. And without then me defining what life is, or that I'm feeling peaceful, or that I'm feeling a bubbling up of just lovingness, or I'm feeling often a bubbling up of just playfulness and joyfulness, without getting too much into defining what the ultimate nature of life is. That's how I be increasingly experience it. And even when we use the word experience it, it's a little bit problematic, because when we think about experiencing something, we conceptually are implying that there's me and there's this thing that I'm experiencing. But the beautiful thing about the arising, and that's why this word awakening is quite a nice one, because it kind of gets around a little bit the duality of he, me experiencing this thing or this feeling or whatever. And it's just an awakening, a, a coming to the fore of this sense of presence, of being me here. It feels nice. So I use in my book a term, formless awareness. We are the formless awareness. We're not the content ever of our awareness. But this formless awareness, it's kind of, yes, it's formless, but it does have some subtle qualities, so long as we're careful not to invite the mind in here to start analysing and dividing and categorising all these qualities, because then we lose it. But it does have these qualities, just as you suggest, Paul. It has this quality of peacefulness. It has a kind of contentedness about it when it arises, when we notice that we're not our thoughts, and I don't need to be troubled by that thought because there's no way I can know for certain that it's true. The thought dissolves, and emotion triggered by it dissolves, and what I'm left with is just this lovely, peaceful feeling of presence, sometimes playfulness, sometimes lovingness, sometimes just contentedness. So it has these qualities, but they're so subtle that we don't want to invite the mind in to define ourselves by as those things, or define the world as those things.